Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Savage Dunham. I'm the Director of Planning for the City of Port St. Lucie. I would like to thank you for joining us tonight. We have people here in the building with us. We also have people registered online. So tonight we're here to talk about the Extraordinary Circumstances Study, which is a portion of our mobility plan and fee schedule update. And I'm going to turn it over pretty quickly to Jonathan Paul, who is our consultant working on the project. Before we get there, just a couple housekeeping items. Anyone in the room, please sign in. We're going to go through the presentation and then take questions at the end. And for the people in the auditorium, we'll put a mic stand up, and when you're ready to ask a question, we'll ask you to come up to the microphone, state your name, and talk into the microphone. We'll move it up there when we're ready. And for the people online, if you have questions, we would ask you to put your questions into the chat, and then our team will read those questions out loud and we'll respond to those. And so with that, we're going to get into this. Again, this is our mobility plan update, and we're here tonight and then again tomorrow at 10 a.m. to talk about extraordinary circumstances. I will say to everyone, there's a lot of information here. If you have more questions after our workshops, if you have specific questions that you need answered, please reach out to me in the planning department. I'm happy to help you set up an individual meeting, whatever it takes to assist you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Paul. He's with New Urban Concepts, and we're going to walk through the technical information for the Extraordinary Circumstances Study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. My name is Jonathan Paul. I'm the principal of New Urban Concepts, and today we will be presenting the city's update to its mobility plan and mobility fee, as well as the findings of extraordinary circumstances. What is a mobility plan? It's actually something the city has now had in place since 2021. But in general, it's a vision for the city's transportation system to transition from one focused on moving vehicles quickly to moving people safely. It is something that's required by Florida statute to be the basis of a mobility fee. The update is looking all the way out into 2050, which is the new time horizon for many of the long-range transportation plans being done throughout Florida right now. It identifies the need for multimodal improvements for all modes of travel, whether you're walking, bicycling, or driving, but it's not necessarily final design. This really sets the big picture, the context, the network, and then each one of these individual projects will go through much further stages of community input, refinement, design, construction, and then ultimately enhancing mobility for city residents. All the information that we're going to talk about this evening is available online, and it's available to be downloaded, to be evaluated, to be viewed. We have provided roughly 3 weeks since these plans have last been updated for members of the public to review them, to write down comments, to ask questions of us. We've made sure not to update these in the interim so people are all reviewing the exact same document. We've gotten a lot of great feedback, and we still welcome feedback from members of the public over this next week. We will be finalizing all these items and be taking back the feedback that we've gotten and presenting a final draft for the City Council's consideration. And likely that will be due sometime around in December, but the agenda cut off somewhere around sometime probably the 17th or 18th of March, of November in terms of finalized. Okay, so we are still working on it. There's ample chances to provide feedback, and we do welcome that feedback from the community. So the overall plan itself is broken down into several components to make it easier to follow and to read for members of the public. There's a short-term plan, which identifies many of the roadway projects likely that are already under design or will start design and construction in the next few years. There's a midterm plan, which is most likely the highest priority projects within the city. And then there's a longer term plan. Many of these corridors require planning and studies today to actually be in the position to be under construction 10 years from now into the future. We also have a number of corridor studies for projects maybe that weren't quite ready yet, or they have right-of-way needs, or they have some environmental impacts. Those are going to require additional evaluation, but there are a number of those that are identified to help address some of the future traffic needs in the community. There's also intersection improvements, multimodal improvements, sidewalks, bicycle lanes, shared use pathways, and the groundwork for our future transit circulation within the city. The overall plan itself is roughly a $2.2 billion plan. Of that, a portion of it is already funded or is likely to be funded through other parties. It leaves us with an unmet need over the next 25 years or so of roughly $1.7 billion. In the short term, over the next 5 to 6 years, there's a need for roughly $400 million in projects. Several of these projects, such as Floresta and Port St. Lucie, are already underway. And then each one of the plans itself has a varying cost to those. The most expensive of the overall plans is the midterm plan, which is the vast majority of projects that are going to be needed within the city over the next 15 years. So what is a mobility fee? A mobility fee, the plan sets the framework for the types of improvements needed in the community. A mobility fee is an assessment on new development, redevelopment, or change of use that results in additional traffic impacts to the system. It's not a tax that gets levied on existing homeowners. It's not a fee that gets accessed to existing businesses. It's only for new or growing businesses that tend to actually expand their facilities. It is a one-time fee to pay for their traffic impacts, and it does help to fund a variety of multimodal improvements. And there's and we'll get into a lot more detail, each one of these in particular. There's a lot of numbers that are involved in here. But at the end of the day, everything that we're going to be talking about in terms of the plan, the fee, the calculations, the study, they end up in a dollar amount or a mitigation amount per square foot, per room, per unit of measure that gets assessed on new development within the city. And this is only for development within the city of Port St. Lucie. St. Lucie County has its own fee that gets assessed out in unincorporated county, and then the city also collects a portion of their fee. But we'll get into a little bit more of these as we go through the presentation and the extraordinary circumstances, show some maps of how these different fees and dollar amounts relate to areas specifically of the overall city, and then get into some options that the council has directed us to look at in terms of phasing these increases over a multi-year period. So these fees and these dollar amounts represent the highest these fees can be between now and 2029. Some of the feedback we've been given to the community, some of these fees will likely come down a little bit further, or they'll likely get refined some if there are any more changes to the overall mobility plan. And these fees vary from residential uses to community serving uses, which are places of worship, to long-term care, which is assisted living facilities, also to private education, such as daycare uses, and private pre-K. Public schools and charter schools are exempt from fees today, and these fees are not new, they're updated. Both the city and county have fees in place today, so these fees and these dollar amounts are updates to those existing numbers. There are also mobility fees that are assessed to industrial types of land uses. For recreation uses, such as golf courses that are open to the members of the public, a trampoline gym, your local gym, or a new gym that's coming into the community. All these type of uses generate traffic, and all of them have a requirement to pay a fee to help offset that traffic impact. Likewise, office uses generate a significant amount of traffic, and medical generates about 3 times as much. So that's why you see certain medical uses will have a higher fee than a standalone office use. And we also have several retail categories. One's for local owned small businesses. That's a lower overall fee per square foot. Then the most common is your multi-tenant. Think of your Publix anchored shopping centers. This is the vast majority of the fees, or you drive along Gatlin or Tradition and you see the little shopping centers. Some of them are brand new. Majority of those fall under the multi-tenant retail. And then every now and then you will see a freestanding gas station or a pharmacy or a bank. Those tend to generate overall higher trips than some of the multi-tenant uses, and they tend to have a higher overall fee as well. And then there are several components. Many of the uses, especially during the COVID pandemic, started to downsize, and what we're seeing is a big emphasis on auto access and convenience, such as drive-through bank tellers or bank lanes without a bank itself. If you've seen any number of the car washes, they're popping up throughout the Port St. Lucie, they're popping up through Fort Pierce, and if you happen to drive elsewhere in Florida, you'll see they're being built everywhere. Those tend to be pretty big traffic generators, and they have a higher fee associated with that. You also have motor vehicle charging and motor vehicle fueling. This is one that we have recently separated out because there are some differences in characteristics between fueling vehicles with gasoline and actually charging them with electricity. Likewise, for quick service vehicles, you're getting your tires replaced or quick lube on your car. There's a cost associated with that. Many retail uses are starting to experiment with drive-throughs. Publix now have pharmacy drive-through lanes. Targets and Walmarts are starting to add in drive-through lanes up front where you either place an order through your cell phone or your app ahead of time, and then you pick that up. Each one of these are shown to have additional traffic. And then, of course, quick service restaurants, more and more of them are getting to the point where they're not necessarily going to have a restaurant inside, but they'll have 2, 3, or 4 drive-through lanes associated with them. So one of the reasons we are here this evening is there are a number of rules and regulations that the Florida legislature has adopted that govern how impact fees and mobility fees are calculated and administered within a community. In 2021, the legislature enacted statutory limits on increases in impact fees and, by context and association, mobility fees as well. And they said that any increase above existing adopted fees is limited to 50%, and then that increase has to be phased in over a multi-year period unless there's a finding of extraordinary circumstances. And what we're going to largely be focusing on this evening is some of those extraordinary circumstances and why we believe that the City of Port St. Lucie's mobility fee should be able to exceed the 50% limit for several land uses, and also a varying phase-in schedule that differs somewhat from Florida statute. So extraordinary circumstance requires a special study that's been conducted, that's been available, and it is online for any members of the public to review. It requires 2 public workshops, the one we're holding this evening and the one we're holding tomorrow. And then before it actually gets adopted, a supermajority of the city council are going to have to vote for the extraordinary circumstance. It can't be a simple majority. It actually has to be a supermajority. This allows for adoption of fees that are greater than 50% or an alternative phasing schedule. It also gives us, the council, its own flexibility to determine a separate phase-in schedule. And it also allows varying ways to adopt fees over a multi-year period. And all of those are factors, I do mention those because that's the direction we have been provided by City Council to help mitigate some of the impact from the overall increase in fees. So there is a lot of information that is available online. A lot of these reports require a significant amount of data and analyses that go into them. And there are 3 particular reports that are available online. One is the 2050 mobility plan, and that focuses largely on the projects, roadways, sidewalks, transit, shared use pathways that are planned in the city over the next 25 years. Then we have the mobility fee technical report, and that gets into all the detailed analysis of how the fee itself is actually calculated and all the data that goes into supporting that calculation. And then finally, we also have a separate study for extraordinary circumstances, which details some of the factors that we believe would allow the city council, if it so chooses to adopt a schedule that exceeds some of the statutory limitations. So some of our findings for extraordinary circumstances that we look at, and one thing to point out with extraordinary circumstances is something that's been in place now by the legislature since 2021. The last 2 sessions, there was a big push to add definitions, or how do you actually define extraordinary circumstances. There is nothing in statute that actually defines those terms. So they've really left it up to local governments. One big change they did make this past session, and it will go into effect as of January 1st of this coming year, 2026, that supermajority vote of the city council or county commission will change to a unanimous vote. And then if you haven't updated your fees in 5 years, you cannot claim extraordinary circumstances. And then any increase has to be phased in over at least 2 years. So the legislature has provided some further structure to extraordinary circumstances, but they still haven't defined what it means. So I work and I have the opportunity to work with communities throughout the state of Florida. Some are rapidly growing communities like you all. We've recently completed a fee for City of Cape Coral. We've recently completed a fee update for the City of Palm Coast. Those are probably 2 of the other counties or cities within the state of Florida that are growing at pretty rapid rates, similar to Port St. Lucie. We also do a number of communities in Central Florida and North Florida that they're growing, but that growth is not necessarily extraordinary. And so we've looked at a variety of factors that go into these. I'm just gonna grab a drink real quick. So some of the factors that we've been looking at and have been successfully looked at and generally accepted by most members of the development community and others that we've reached out to is, how is your community growing in relationship to the state of Florida? The state of Florida has historically been the fastest growing state in the country, or trades places with Texas or some other small area. But in general, Florida is a fast growing state, and most places would consider our growth extraordinary. So one metric I look at is, are you growing faster than the state of Florida? That's looking in the past. We also look in the future. Are you going to continue to grow as fast or faster than the state of Florida? Since we've been doing a number of these updates, we have some assumptions that we've made just a few years back in terms of population growth and employment growth, and those have already been exceeded as part of this update, given how rapidly the city itself has been growing. We look at increases in traffic and how much that has or has not occurred between the plans. We look at the needs for the actual physical needs for improvements within the overall community. We look at the capacity and the traffic those have on the overall roadway system. We look at the cost and whether those have continued to go up since the COVID period. And we also look at other statewide factors related to inflation and national inflation factors as well. And then we also look at, is the city has any opportunities to offset some of these expenses so it's not necessarily borne just by new development. And then really just a general overall finding that documents that there is a real need. So one of the biggest requirements for extraordinary circumstances is you actually have to show a need for improvements. And one of the whole bases of a mobility plan and mobility fee is we've identified a detailed list of projects, a mobility plan. they are the basis for the fee. There's a direct connection between the project that we have in there, the cost of that project, the capacity, and the overall fee itself. We look as St. Lucie County, they're going through a similar update. They don't have a plan. They don't have a transportation plan. They don't have an adopted list of projects for the basis of their for their overall needs. They basically have deferred to somewhat of the long-range transportation plan, but they haven't gone through the process of developing a detailed mobility plan that says, here are the needs associated with new growth in our community. And that's one of the things that we've done, and actually that is a specific requirement of Florida statute, that you have a demonstrated need for these types of increases. So has the city been growing faster than the state of Florida? If any of you have all lived here for any length of time, you know that's true. Florida's been growing fast, but Port St. Lucie's been growing even faster. It doesn't really matter what time frame you look at, whether it's 2010 to 2020, 2014 and 2024. Historically, the city is growing at potentially upwards of double the rate of the overall state of Florida. And so the growth within Port St. Lucie has been significant and much higher than that of the state of Florida. Projected going out into the future to 2050, based on the projected development, working with the Transportation Planning Organization recently on update of their travel demand model, there's upwards of 260,000 additional residents, or I'm sorry, over 200,000 residents that could be coming into the Port St. Lucie by 2050. We project the population could be as high as 500,000 over that time frame. If that occurs, that's dramatically higher than the state of Florida, growing at 20%. As Port St. Lucie goes, so goes St. Lucie County. The city is the largest component of the county, so as the city grows, the county also grows as well. But that growth is significant, and some of the most significant growth within the state of Florida. I think probably portions of Osceola County and St. Johns County on the central and northern part of the state are probably two of the few communities that are growing as fast or as faster than Port St. Lucie. Just in the terms of when we last did this update 2 years ago as part of the Phase 2 plan, in 2045, we estimated the population of Port St. Lucie to be 369,000. As part of this update, we estimate to be 506,000. So that's just, within a matter of a couple of years time frame, population projections increased by 136,000, which is, pretty significant. But let's see if I have that in here. One of the things to consider, though, is as significant as that 136,000 is, just between 2020 and 2025, the city added 60,000 residents in 5 years. So if you think about that metric in a 5-year period between 2020 and 2025, adding 60,000 residents, here we're talking about adding upwards to 200,000 over the next 25 years. So that rate of growth is being observed within the city today. That's actually one of the reasons we've looked at this, is how many residents have been added to the community just over the past few years alone. All these data analysis we look at are based on real information, real projections, real land uses. It's not just something that we grab out of the air, but we've gotten development approvals, we've got pending developments, we've got a number of other factors that we've looked at within the city itself and also in the surrounding portions of unincorporated county. And so just in 2022 alone, this is a study area we looked at in terms of our population and growth. Since that time, there's been a big push to consider more and more development potential, largely, let's see how well this works here. Pointer. This is Range Line Road, and this would be the extension of Range Line Road north, Glades Cutoff. when we were last working on this plan, there were a number of projects in here that had approvals 20 plus years ago that really hadn't started moving forward in this area. And there was no discussion of any development going on in this entire area when we last updated this plan just 3 years ago. Since that time, I would say the vast majority of this whole area in the Northwest has some level of development approval or development plan, either in the works, discussion, or has had approvals for 20 plus years. The county has already approved a large-scale subdivision already to the west of Range Line Road, and there are a number of other projects that have approached both the city and the county that are interested in coming into the community. Neither the city or the county has really identified a network out in this area, and neither had the TPO, the Transportation Planning Organization. As part of this update, all three parties are now focused on this area, and all three are looking at the growth in this entire corridor and the potential in the west. Some of it's going to be within the city, some of it's going to remain in unincorporated county. The reality is it's a lot of development. And with that, as we looked through the increases, the potential increases in traffic over that time frame, between 2020 and 2050, we project is going to be roughly an increase in 3 million vehicle miles of travel within the community. It's roughly a 113% increase. In the last update, we looked at the difference between 2015 and 2045, and we projected an increase of basically 1.7 million vehicle miles of travel. So we've almost doubled the vehicle miles of travel potential just within a 5-year period, with all that potential development going on out to the west, and then just growth in the overall community. And the community itself is growing faster than what's been projected historically. So I just think about it, just in the last 5 years, the city of Port St. Lucie added a quarter of its population in 5 years. That's substantial and significant growth, and I think any member of the public that's driving around in the traffic in the community over these last few years, they've witnessed that firsthand. So as part of the update, we've looked at the long-range modeling needs and long-range volume needs throughout the county. And largely the area that we're focused at, which is predominantly what is made up of the city of Port St. Lucie, are those areas south of Midway Road. There is growth in unincorporated county. There's growth obviously in Fort Pierce, but a lot of our studies and data analysis show that most of the trips that begin and end in Port St. Lucie either stay here or for work trips, they predominantly head to the south. But as more and more people work from home, as more and more people work remotely, the share of work trips is going down and down and down every year. And roughly it represents about 15% of overall travel. So that means 85% of the other travel on the network is people going to school, people going to the gym, going to healthcare, going to grocery store, visiting friends. It's for everything else other than the work trip. And that's one of the reasons why traffic's gotten worse as well, is more and more of that traffic is just spreading throughout the overall day, especially as more people have the opportunity to work from home. And one thing this has done, both for the city and county, is it's opened some eyes in terms of some of the needs for roadway projects. So we've identified a number of those in the travel demand model. We've identified a number of those in the mobility plan. And then there are a significant number of corridor studies. The last go around, we had 1 corridor study identified. Now we have, I think, upwards to 25. And part of that is because some of the growth that's going on in the community, and most of the easy solutions to improve traffic have already been done. So now what we're getting into is stuff that's going to impact major intersections, going to impact potentially homes and businesses, or it's going to cause delay to the transportation system. And any of the other types of projects could help relieve that. They all have potential impacts, whether they be environmental, neighborhood, or whatnot. they have a lot more impacts that need to be looked at, and they weren't necessarily something that could be determined in the next 2 years. So this has created a much bigger need and really even sets a context that going forward is going to continue to need to be innovative solutions for mobility within Port St. Lucie. Another factor we've looked at is the increase in the need for roadway capacity, just in and of itself, and the overall cost of that capacity. Our phase 2 plan in the overall road cost was roughly $658 million. As part of this update, that jumps to $1.8 billion. It's roughly an increase of $1.1 billion just over the last 3 years. And one of those driving factors is the previous mobility plan looked at a lot of opportunities to add in multimodal lanes for transit vehicles, for bicycle lanes, for e-bikes, for e-scooters. And what's happened is the need for road capacity has really outweighed some of that opportunities to look at other modes of travel. So whereas a roadway such as Bayshore a few years back, or Torino, was looked to have a multimodal path, 2 travel lanes, a center turn lane, and some roundabouts. Now the volumes are saying the road needs to be 4 lanes, and you need to have a nice shared use path on it. The shared use pathway can accommodate people walking, bicycling, strollers, but they're not necessarily accommodating a golf cart. They're not necessarily accommodating a transit vehicle. But the reality is the need for road capacity has sort of advanced ahead of where we just thought a few years back. And a number of the corridors that are being looked at now are being looked at to be widened to 4-lane roadways. And here's just an example of that. The number of 2-lane divided roads in our phase 2 previous mobility plan was roughly 27 miles. It's been decreased to 11.3 miles. In the previous plan, we had roughly 9 miles of roadways being widened from 2 to 4 lanes. Now we're proposing 64 miles to be widened from 2 to 4 lanes. And so that's a significant difference in types of planning between what we did a few years ago and what we've done now, and the associated cost. As I mentioned also earlier, we have a number of corridor studies that are trying to look at innovative ways to deal with traffic. In the prior plan, we had 1.4 miles identified for a corridor study. Now we have 42 miles identified. So there's a lot more need that's come up, and when you grow by 60,000 residents in 5 years, that tends to change some of your projections as you're moving forward. And again, so the overall cost itself is significantly higher. We had hoped as part of COVID, what we had seen is from 2020 to 2022, costs were going up fairly significantly, and a large part of that was tied to the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, the city has continued to see high costs as it relates to roadway construction. Well, maybe not as high as the ultimate peak during COVID. They're still significant and they're still substantial to the point that just the plan overall itself, in the 3 years since we last updated it, the costs have doubled during that time frame. And this is not necessarily uncommon to Port St. Lucie. We've seen it occur in other communities as well. There was an overall hope or projection that as of 2023, 2024, so things would have started leveling out. They haven't. They've continued to escalate, and they've continued to escalate fairly rapidly. And this isn't just for, it's one thing to look at the city of Port St. Lucie, and that's really the main factor to look at, because Florida statute requires you to look at your local conditions. But we also looked at how is this impacting the state as well? Is the state experiencing similar increases coming out of COVID? Again, there was a hope at the state level things would level off as well. And just in their preliminary estimates, and their last time they updated their numbers was the end of 2024, their cost estimates just over a 3-year horizon have also increased by over 100%. And this is the State Department of Transportation. They have massive pricing power. They have control over a much bigger range of suppliers and contractors in the city of Port St. Lucie. Even their costs have increased over 100% in just a 3-year period. At the national level, which includes every state in the country, so that includes all the states in the north, the northeast, that aren't growing as rapidly, includes Massachusetts, Vermont, and Idaho, all these other communities. So you'd expect that the numbers themselves on a national level would be a little bit lower, but they've still, the last time we looked at this, they were growing at 13.3% a year inflation. Now they're growing at 12.5%. So really there has not been any significant decrease in inflation level just within the last 3-year period. To give some context, the typical inflation that we've dealt with for over 20 years, from 2008 to 2018 at a national level, was less than 1% a year. At a state level, it was about 3.5% a year. Now the national level, it's 12.5% a year, and at the state and local level, it's 35-40% per year. We look at the availability of funding to help offset some of the needed improvements. There are several corridors that are already funded within the time horizon of the mobility plan. There's one large project that we are proposing. This will be a new interchange at the on Interstate 95 at Marshall Parkway, which is basically the area between Tradition Parkway and Gatlin and Becker. And that cost estimate is upwards of $150 million. We'd assume, though, if that does ultimately come to fruition, that the vast majority of that would be funded through the state of Florida. So we estimate that $135 million of that would be funded through the state. So that actually helps to reduce the overall cost of the mobility plan itself. And then just any other additional funds that are reasonably anticipated. It's increased from phase 2. We estimated it to have about $420 million in funding from other sources. Here we estimate $514 million over that same time horizon. So it's basically about a 22% increase. And this helps to offset the overall cost of the mobility plan itself. This is just sort of a breakdown of the overall cost by planning section and their fees and the calculations that go into that. And this sort of shows, again, the need for improvements. And that need today is roughly at a $2.2 billion level. With the available funding, takes it down to roughly a $1.7 billion level over the next 25 years. So the City Council, as part of the extraordinary circumstances, those are all the factors that we've looked at. And in terms of the fee itself, to help offset some of the impact and the increases from the current fee today to the future fee, they have asked us to look at phasing in those increases over a 4-year period. So some of these fees would go into effect as of 2026, 90 days after adoption. And then 2027, 2028, and 2029, the rest of the phasing would go into effect as well. And then by 2029, the city would be doing another update to look at those fees out into the 2030 time horizon. And so fees themselves within the city of Port St. Lucie, there are 3 assessment areas today. Those are largely the areas east of I-95, northwest, which is basically northwest of I-95, south of Midway Road, north of the Glades Cutoff, the southwest area, which is largely the Tradition area, and then to the west would be the western expansion area. And as you can see right now, only a small portion of that area is actually, city limits may have already changed. There may have been some other additional annexations here, but For the most part, this area is largely unincorporated county. If and when these developments come in, some are going to annex into the city, some are going to stay in the county. To help address some of the share of the cost of these roadways that are needed for this development, we are proposing a new assessment area for the west. And there have been some complaints or some discussion about this fee is higher than other areas of the city. And when we look at fees, we're looking primarily at three main factors. One is, what is the cost of the overall needs associated with the area in particular? What is their share of costs elsewhere within the city? And then how far are people traveling? So just when you look at pure length and pure distance, if you're somebody that happens to live near Village Parkway and Tradition Parkway, you're less than a mile from the interstate system. You're maybe 3 or 4 miles, you're 4 miles from where we're at today to City Hall. You're within a mile or two of a lot of shops and restaurants. The further west you get, you have more and more distance that you have to travel. Ultimately, I think it's almost 4 miles between the interstate system and Range Line Road. So if you're in the very further portions of Tradition, you're gonna have a bigger overall system and impact than somebody right by the interstate. But on average, we come up with the average and split it down the middle between the two of them. Well, likewise, the further west you go, not only are there fewer roads, there are fewer support services that go along with that today. May they be eventually built in the future? Yes, but the vast majority of those homes for the foreseeable future are going to Tradition, or they're going east to the interstate for the hospital, for groceries, for school, for jobs, for almost anything that they've got to do, they've got to drive, and they've got to drive a fairly amount of distance. So the reason that fee is higher is just physical distance between when those developments are located at versus developments located closer to the interstate system and the turnpike system. So it's not that the city or we just feel like we want to punish new development. We want to make it expensive for them. The reality is, the further you live away from where there are services, the greater impact you have on the roadway system. And so somebody living near City Hall or St. Lucie West or living near a Publix, they could theoretically walk, they could bike, take the golf cart, even though that's kind of frowned upon, but, or they could drive a very short distance. Once you get 2, 3, 4, 5 miles away from those Publix, from those grocery stores, from those other uses, your primary option is to drive. And that's really what these fees help reflect, and that's one of the reasons why they're different between the various assessment areas. In fact, actually, the southwest area has the lowest fee because there are developers there that are building some of the roadway infrastructure. They have some of the improvements that are already in place. So we account for that in our overall calculations. So we're making sure that we're not overcharging them for their impact. So they actually have a lower fee than development out east, development to the northwest, or development to the southwest. Because one, they have a relatively compact travel pattern. Two, some of those developers are already funding roadways as well. So to make sure that we're not overcharging them, we've reflected that in the fee calculations themselves. And so that, I'm gonna kind of get into and we've color coded these to try to make it a little bit easier to see the differences between the two of them. So the green would be associated with the east, the light orange, beige color of the southwest, the blue color of the northwest, and the purple is the western area. So you see that as part of the existing fee today, as part of the city and the county fee that's being assessed within Port St. Lucie. So there's a city fee per 1,000 square feet, and then a fixed county fee of roughly $2,000 per dwelling unit. And so that a number comes out to be $3,660 per 1,000 square feet. The updated fee itself is $4,261. So the total increase between the two of those is $601. Now, when we look at this total increase, when we do our update, this is how we did our update in 2022 and how we've done it now. We less out the travel on county roads as part of the fee. All of our analysis, all of our data, the eastern portion of the city, about 10% of the travel occurs on county roads. That's Midway, that's Walton, that's Prima Vista, that's St. James, it's a little part of Glisson way down here in the corner, a little part of Indian River. But overall, most of the travel that is east of 95, south of Midway, almost 80% of it occurs on roads that are owned, maintained, and funded by the city of Port St. Lucie. About 6 or 7% are on US 1 and a portion of Port St. Lucie that are controlled by the state, and then roughly 10% are the county. So we have reduced the travel and the fee for the city by 10% to account for travel on the county roads. West of I-95, there are more county roads. There's Glades Cutoff, there's Range Line, there's Midway. Traffic on those roads is relatively low, but they're pretty long segments of roadway. So roughly 22% of the travel in this area occurs on county roads. We have reduced the fee by 22% west of the interstate. We can't control ultimately what St. Lucie County does or doesn't adopt. They are looking at a potential update of their fee. They're going through a similar process as we're going through right now. In 2 years from now, the city and county will have to go through an interlocal agreement update where these numbers will likely be revisited again. But when we did the study in 2022, we took a flat rate of 21% and said 21% of the county travel, or so 21% of the travel occurred on county roads. So we reduced our fee by 21%. Here we dug into it even deeper, and we found that 10% of the travel east of the interstate, 22% of the travel west of the interstate. So that number there, $4,261, that reflects the reduced travel on city roads to account for the county. This does not include the county's fee. This is the city's updated mobility fee. That's what we control. That's what we're calculating. There'll be a negotiation between the county and the city in terms of what portion of that fee can be assessed. In terms of the way Florida statute's structured, the entity issuing building permits and the entity with the mobility plan is the one that drives sort of the analysis and the cost of the fees. And then if somebody wants to assess a fee in addition to that, they've got to make their case. The case we're making is county, 22% of the travel west of the interstate, you can likely claim that and you can identify improvements for that. You can look at a fee for that. You can charge something potentially for that. Our numbers show east of the interstate, it's only 10%. So if the county comes in and says, well, we want to continue to have you, collect $3,000 for us or $2,000 for us, that's a decision that the city's going to have to look at as part of its interlocal agreement and say, our numbers don't support that. So up until the interlocal's adopted, there are certain things that the city and county have to agree to work on. Once the interlocal expires, it will be the city's fees themselves that control. One of the benefits of phasing in these increases in 2026 2027, 2028, and 2029, is it will provide some time for the city and the county to work out what that ultimate dollar amount should be, so that the members of the development community are not being overcharged. But we've detailed in our analysis, in our documentation, what these fees should be, what the share of it should be for the county, what share of it should be for the city, and we're moving forward with those numbers. The phase-in schedule does provide some flexibility to make sure that, the development community is not hit up front with the full cost, plus any changes that the county may make. And it will allow the city and the county over the next few years to negotiate the interlocal agreement, to negotiate what is a fair dollar amount that should be allocated between the city and the county. So that's what these numbers show. And so the way the city could theoretically adopt that number today as part of extraordinary circumstance. They can say, we're going to adopt the full rate and it's going to go into effect 2026. That's what extraordinary circumstances allows the city to do. What the city has done is say, well, we know we're in discussions with the county. We know that there's a lot of talk right now that we may be entering a little bit of a slow period. We still have the right to phase in these fees. So we're going to phase that increase, which is roughly $150 a year per 1,000 square feet, over each one of these categories. So instead of the fee being $4,261, it'd be $3,810 in 2026. It would not get to the full rate until 2029. Now again, that's per 1,000 square feet. The average single-family home within Port St. Lucie is 2,000 square feet. So you take that number, 4,200, multiply it by 2. So their fee would be $8,400. When you see a multifamily, most multifamily apartment buildings are about 1,000 square feet. So that number is pretty representative of what an apartment would be. For single-family homes, you basically would multiply that number by 2. And we have these type of schedules for each one of the 4 assessment areas. And so we're going to kind of focus on the single family, and I'll just walk you through these examples. But a lot of this is available online. I'm not going to go into each one of these in detail, but if there are members of the public that have questions about specific uses, we'd be happy to answer those, whether today or you can email us and we specifically get into those uses. The vast majority of the questions we get, though, are related to the single family use. And so for each one of the categories, each one of the land uses we have, we've broken down what's the total increase, what's the updated amount, and then how is that fee phased in over a 4-year period. And we've done that with each of the fees, each of the categories, and each of the assessment areas. So going back to the assessment area map, that one map that we showed, it had the 4 different colors on it. This would be the southwest area. This is largely the tradition area. So you saw their fee for the east was $4,200 per 1,000 square feet. In the southwest area, because you have developers that are committed to several of the roadway projects that are out there already, their fee is actually $3,500 per 1,000 square feet. So we're not overcharging them for something that they're already building. We're giving them a recognized, I don't want to call it a credit, but when we calculate the numbers themselves, they're not paying twice for the same type of roadway project. They're paying one time, and then they're getting a lower fee to reflect the fact that they're already building some of the infrastructure. So their increase is actually $93 per year. So their maximum fee for a single family out in that portion of the tradition area would be roughly $7,000 within the tradition area community. Again, that is due in large part because most of the master developers that are in tradition have some obligations where they're building other infrastructure today. And so if we charge them the same rate that we did for the east, we would not be recognizing the fact that they're already paying and already putting in infrastructure. And then you look at the northwest, which would be north of Glades. You see that the fee there is $4,800. For the east, it was $4,200. They have not only do they have some greater needs out there, there's not as much support services, so everybody's driving further. But one of the differences you also see is that number could be much higher, except that we're saying we've reduced that overall calculation by 22% to account for travel on county roads. In the east, we've only reduced it by 10% for travel on county roads. The northwest, where there are more county roads, there's more potential county development, they have a higher overall share of the cost over there, and they could potentially have a higher fee in the western portion of the city versus the eastern portion. But likewise, just like all the other fees, it works a similar manner. This is what they pay today. This is what the updated fee would be. That's the total dollar increase divided by 4 years, because we're phasing in over a 4-year period. So that's a fee that goes into effect 2026, 2027, 2028, and 2029. And then finally, we're almost wrapped up here, the west. So this is the area, this is largely unincorporated county today. This could have a mixture of incorporated and unincorporated uses. When we first started this analysis at the beginning of the year, this fee was $35,000 a single family home. Because we had we basically said, these are all the roadway needs that have to be provided to accommodate this development, plus the development roads that have to be built with it. Over this entire year, we've gone through and we've reduced the mobility plan. We've had feedback. We've had a number of communications with the city, with the county, with stakeholders, and we've helped to reduce that overall fee and to focus really on what the specific infrastructure is needed today. And so that fee has gone from $35,000 for what would have been a 2,000 square foot house to roughly $10,800. So that's gone down more than $20,000 a dwelling unit. So this fee is actually, the counties has their own numbers that they've done, and I think their fee for this area is about $10,000 to $12,000 for a single family home, and then their high rate is like $16,000. So this number is not that far off from what the counties even estimated as part of their own impact fee. So we've tried to listen to the community. We've tried to balance a lot of the impact, a lot of the needs we had. And likewise for the same. For the Northwest, I think the initial fee was like $25,000. For the East, in tradition, it was $20,000. So through the guidance of the City Council, through the City Council's direction, through the feedback that we've gotten, and they had to make some hard decisions. They had a lot of needed roadway projects. They have a lot of members of the community saying, we need roadway projects today. And they said, well, focus on what are the most needed improvements, focus on where we have funding available, and really per their direction and per the feedback we've gotten from the community, these fees have gone down by more than half. Some of them have gone down by like 75%. So we've come up with a fee today that still is high. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, $10,000 is not a high fee. But when you look at the area that we're talking about, west of Rangeline Road, there's no infrastructure at all out there. Rangeline Road's a 2-lane undivided roadway with a rail, part of a canal or part of a railroad track. There are no turn lanes, there are no traffic signals, there are no sidewalks, 60-mile-an-hour posted speed limit. Then you got Glades cutoff. That's it. That's your whole road network serving that whole area to the west Now, we have some development partners, Wilder, that they've helped build Wilder Parkway, and they're making some improvements out there. But they're one of the few that have actually helped build some of the infrastructure that's going on out there. But you look at Tradition, you see all the new roads that are constantly get built there. Or, you drive around where you're at today. If traffic's horrible on Gatlin, yeah, you're probably gonna get stuck, but maybe there are a few side roads that you could take, or maybe you could have gone up to the crosstown. There's some other ways to get around. To the west, you have 2 roads. And so part of the reason these costs are higher is, one, they're gonna have to build their infrastructure, but then everything they do, they're driving. They're not walking their bike, they're not, or they're not walking, they're not riding their bike, they're not riding a golf cart on a 65-mile-an-hour roadway. They're driving in their vehicle, and that's gonna have a big impact on the overall system. So I think these fees accurately reflect that's a long way from where all our services are. You need a lot of infrastructure to get up there, and there's a cost associated with that. Otherwise, the residents that are on the east side, or the residents in Tradition, the residents in Fort Pierce, your residents today, whatever doesn't ultimately get paid by development is going to be borne by the overall cost of all residents and businesses in the community. So it's up to them to pay for their share of it. What the ultimate number will be, there's still going to be input, time for feedback. But again, we've taken our direction. We've listened to the concerns of the community. We understand that there was a lot of negativity at first about the high fees. Those just reflected, everything that actually was needed here. Here we've gone through, done a lot more detailed fine tuning of it, said what's new development share, what's a share that should be part of the fee, what share of it should go to the county. And these are ultimately the fees that we've come up with. And again, this is a lot to digest. And if there are any members of the public, and again, I just went through those fee calculations, if you're concerned about a retail drive-through lane, or you're concerned about an office or a place of worship, please reach out to the city. We'll get in touch with you. We'll meet with you. We'll walk through how these are calculated. We'll explain why they're calculated, why one fee is higher than the other. We will be producing a standard question, sort of an FAQ, to take all the feedback that we've been given. So that will help members of the public further identify some of the overall questions and comments that may come up. And how does this relate to my fee? How does this relate to my project? Or how does this help the overall community? But we really have identified what we feel the costs are continuing to go up. The growth is continuing to occur. And there continues to be a need for sidewalks, for bike lanes, for roadways within Port St. Lucie. We think this fee is the next step as part of that. There's still a lot of work that's going to be done, still feedback that we're going to take, and there's still a lot of coordination with our partners at the county and elsewhere. So we will have, I think actually this date's changed a little bit. The first reading has not been scheduled yet. I think Mary's going to chime in a little bit on that. But everything we do, any changes we make, any feedback that we have, any questions we have, we're going to be posting and making this all available online so everybody can see how we responded to questions and what the outcome of that was, and to try to be just very transparent in this overall process. So before we turn it over to the Q&A, questions and answers, Mary's going to talk a little bit about schedule and the upcoming hearings.
Great, thank you. Yes, this PowerPoint, we didn't want to change it after we posted it, but just to be clear, we have not scheduled the first reading. We were being a little aspirational, but at this point in time, we wanted to go through the workshops, take the feedback. We're open to individual meetings with stakeholders, and we're going to take all that information back, continue to refine the materials, and then we will be looking, of course, to schedule the public, the first reading and second reading. Our goal is to have this completed before the end of the calendar year. And so with that, We are going to open it up to Q&A. We're going to put a microphone up in the middle of the room. If anyone in the audience wants to ask questions, we're just going to ask you to state your name and speak into the microphone because we're recording the meeting and we're live on Zoom. And then any of our stakeholders online, if you have questions, if you put them into the chat box, we're going to read those into the record. I think Ms. Grubbs is going to help with that. And we'll get those answered as well.
Hi, I'm Deb Frazier. I'm the Executive Officer of the Treasure Coast Builders Association, and as always, I have a few questions.
Yeah.
The first question I have is the ITE. I noticed you're using the 11th edition, but the 12th edition came out in August. Is that going to change before you do your final numbers?
It will. We've already looked at those numbers, and it will be based on the 12th edition. It hasn't had, I think there's some retail uses that had a little bit of a higher impact by a couple of percent, and then the residential, I think maybe a 2 or 3% reduction. But overall, the numbers are relatively consistent. But they will be based, and industrial has come down as well. Thank you for pointing that one out. But yes, they will reflect the 12th edition.
Okay, great. My next question is on your addendum X, which matches up with the slide you showed us. The number, and let's go back to your east numbers. Your east number was 3660, but what it shows on your addendum X is that is city and county together. But when you do your other numbers, that's only city. So when you're showing those increases, that's not apples to apples. And I just want to be sure I'm correct in that.
You are correct in that. It's been a challenge to show how, all these fees relate to each other and the phasing. Ultimately what we can control ourselves right now is the calculated dollar amount and then what that will relate to what the fees that are in place today. There is going to have to be coordination with our partners at the county to show how the overall impact is going to have. And that's one thing I think it's really positive that we have the phasing for the 2 years. So I think it's going to help limit some of that. I hope the county, if they were to consider increasing theirs, would also consider a phasing. But then we're going to have some negotiations with the county on what is fair and equitable in terms of what's going to be collected.
And we do appreciate very much the 4-year phasing,
Yes.
so that is very much appreciated. Do you have a number of, you keep talking about the extraordinary circumstances and the increase in population. Do you have a number of how many of that population has been annexed into the city versus just came into the city separately?
That I would have to defer to planning staff on.
Okay,
No.
okay, thank you.
And I believe those numbers also came from the state of Florida had to verify with the city, hey, these numbers are actually correct because they're so high. We just wanted to double check with you, but I think the states also independently verified that as well.
Correct, and I'll just say into the microphone for the record, we have not had population annex into the city over the past 5 years. That's all been in migration and tremendous population growth really shot up during COVID, I think is when the biggest surge was. And then the secret got out and people realized how great it is here, and it hasn't slowed down really.
I will, to that effect, one of the things you did mention that things are slowing down. I just want to bring to everybody's attention that permits in total St. Lucie County, which the city of Port St. Lucie is 67% of the county, the permits were down on new construction residential 40% in August versus last year. So it's not just a slowdown, it's a tremendous slowdown. So I just want to remind everybody of that as we're looking at these numbers. Thank you.
Absolutely, and the city council has really made, driven it home that we've got to be, one, they obviously need to meet the needs of the residents, but also be respectful with the development community in terms of how this impacts them and to work with them to hopefully come up with a solution that works for everybody. So that's the direction we've been given to work with you all and to make sure, to the extent nobody's happy about fees, nobody's happy about any increases, but to make sure they're as reasonable and just as can be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody online have a question? If you do, you can put it into the chat box. Is there anybody else that's present that would like to get up and ask any questions? Again, if you're listening tonight or listening to us in reruns and you have questions, please, my name's Mary Savage Dunham in the Planning Department. Feel free to reach out to me. We'll be happy to meet with you, answer all your questions. So if you don't think of it now or you don't want to ask us right now, we're available to discuss this with you.
And Mary, are these being recorded? Will they be available for any members of the public that haven't had a chance to view them today?
Yes, they're going out live. They are being recorded, and then we'll post them on our project website as well.
So if any of you all that are in attendance, or you have a colleague, professional, family member that could be in attendance, these are being recorded. They will be available online. And again, we welcome any of your feedback. Ultimately, we want to make sure that the City Council has all the information they need to make an informed decision and to hopefully make the decision the community can support. And we have another one of these, so if you don't have anything else to do with your time and you want to enjoy us and join us tomorrow, we'll be here again at 10 o'clock. And thank you all very much for taking time this evening to be with us.